message from 1 Kings 16 as we continue on Wednesday nights talking about the kings, kinging, in the Chronicles and the kings of the Bible. Okay, so there's an old saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I'm not sure that this necessarily applies to what we're going to be talking about, but it might. Maybe the king who had everything going for him and had done such amazing things in his short time as king just wanted his nation to be at peace again. All of it. The king we're talking about, of course, is Jehoshaphat, who we've studied the last couple of weeks. And so, regardless of all of that stuff, the decision of Jehoshaphat comes into question with his associations. He makes a decision here in 2 Chronicles 18 that kind of, well, it's a head scratcher. How about that? Because chapter 17 tells us about all these great things that he's done. He is following the Lord. Remember, probably the most telling thing about his ways as king is that he is following the Lord in the first ways of David. He is very close to the Lord. And not only is he close to the Lord, but he is wanting his people to be close to the Lord as well. And so he is encouraging them, teaching them. He's got priests and Levites going out with the law, which means that they're making copies of it again, right? Going out with copies of the law to teach the Judahites how to, is it Judahites or Judah-uns? Anyway, the southern kingdom, he's teaching them how to be close to the Lord again, what it takes to have a relationship with God. And then, chapter 18 starts with the head scratcher. Read with me in verse 1. Now Jehoshaphat had riches and honor in abundance and joined affinity with Ahab. Now, the bulk of the message is going to be talking about Ahab tonight, but we already kind of know a little bit about him, don't we? Why do we know a little bit about Ahab? Because he's probably one of the more well-known, ungodly, villainous leaders that any nation had ever had, especially a nation of God's people. Because the northern kingdom, they were still Jews. They were still God's chosen. And so, what is Jehoshaphat doing, joining affinity or getting in cahoots with Ahab? Verse 2. After certain years, Jehoshaphat, went down. Remember I told you on Sunday night, when you leave Jerusalem, you go down the mountain, basically. So he's going down, even though he's moving north to Samaria. And Ahab killed sheep and oxen for him in abundance, and for the people that he had with him, and persuaded him to go up with him to Ramoth Gilead, because there was a battle that was going to ensue there. And so Ahab wants Jehoshaphat, and remember the end of last week's message, we talked about the fact that he was building a great dynamic army in the southern kingdom with, the Bible describes them as mighty men. That's also how the men that surrounded the court of David were described. So Jehoshaphat was being blessed, and so all of a sudden Ahab is like, hey, let's go in together here and go to battle together against Ramoth Gilead. Verse 3, and Ahab, king of Israel, said unto Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, wilt thou go with me to Ramoth Gilead? And he answered him, I am as thou art, and my people as thy people, and we will be with thee in the war. Huh. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Okay, the way we've got to tell this story and the way we've got to fit all this together is you've got to know that that's going on or going to ultimately go on as the reign of Ahab commences. Okay, so you've got to know, we've got to leave Jehoshaphat, in other words, for just a little bit so that we can go and catch back up with the whole nation. And again, now that you read those 3 verses and you see that he's joining affinity with Ahab, a wicked king, and you know the previous chapter talks about how godly a man he is, you have to wonder a few things, don't you? I mean, you kind of got to scratch your head a little bit and think, do you give him the benefit of the doubt? Or is Jehoshaphat lost his mind? I mean, seriously, what gives? I don't know that we really have an answer in the scriptures. I've read over it, and I just can't figure out an answer. But I would hope that it might have something to do with the fact that Jehoshaphat was a peacemaker. And he really desired for God's people to be together. And maybe, just maybe, his godly influence could influence an ungodly man like Ahab. I'm hoping that is the situation. But you know as well as I do, that doesn't always work out very well. I mean, think about your past. I think about my past. When I thought I was really going to go in and have an influence on some ungodly people, usually the ungodliness rubbed off on me. And that's why we don't make best friends with the world. Right? Because the ways of the world will rub off on us very quickly. We'll start acting like the world, talking like the world, doing the things that the world do very quickly if we're not careful. And so we do have to pay very close attention to those things. And the other thing about it is Jehoshaphat has so much going for him right now. Why blow it? Why move in any other direction? Why change what's going on? I don't know. Maybe the person on the phone knows. But it's puzzling to me. You know? It's got to be puzzling to all of us, right? Because we just don't know why he would do such a thing. So, we really can't lay the blame on thick at this point. So we just don't know. I think we can be sure by what we already know about Jehoshaphat that he desired for God's people to be followers of God. That much we do know. And so maybe that's where his peacemaker personality figured into this association with a wicked king like Ahab. He might have thought this cooperation would bring about a unified Israel again in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Because remember, Israel has been going through some serious civil war now, ever since the split. But I will say this, as we all know, our associations with the enemy, our associations with ungodly people are potentially dangerous. Now, listen again to what I said a minute ago. We don't become best friends with the world. We do create relationships with ungodly people with the idea in mind that we are going to witness to them. That is the difference. And that is the motivation. I believe one of the strengths within the church needs to be, that's where our closest relationships should be. Because we're there for each other, you know? And we can pray for each other, and we can talk to each other, we can be honest with one another, we can be there when times are tough for each other, and we can pray for those relationships outside of church to remain witnessing opportunities so that the ungodly influence doesn't overcome us. You see what I'm saying? So there is a situation here, and maybe, just maybe again, Jehoshaphat is having this in mind. If you want to read ahead and find out how that affinity went, you can do that. It's a free country, if you don't already know. But I will say this, that we'll get back to it, and we'll study what happened in a little bit. Because we've got to leave Jehoshaphat for just a second and think about Ahab. So in order to do that, let's go back to 1 Kings chapter 16. 1 Kings chapter 16. And we've got a little bit of reviewing to do, because it's been a couple of weeks since we had the Northern Kingdom kings in our view. So we'll just review very quickly, beginning in verse 22. 1 Kings 16, 22. But the people that followed Omri prevailed against the people that followed Tibni, the son of Ganath. So Tibni died, and Omri reigned. Those were the two generals, remember, or the two captains under the reign of Zimri. Why they all end like that and rhyme, I have no idea. But it does kind of help you either be really confused or remember them. Kind of like snap, crackle, and pop. Okay? So, in verse 23, in the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, began Omri to reign over Israel. And he reigned 12 years. 6 years reigned he in Tirzah. And he bought the hill Samaria of Shemer. That is how the city got its name. It is an offshoot of his name. For 2 talents of silver, and built on the hill, and called the name of the city which he built after the name of Shemer, owner of the hill, Samaria. But Omri, verse 25 says, wrought evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did worse than all that were before him. We're talking about the Northern Kingdom kings here, the kings of Israel. And for that statement to be made, after he's following the footsteps of guys like Jeroboam, that's a statement, is it not? He's done evil more than all that were before him. For he walked in all the way of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. That's the first Jeroboam king of the Northern Kingdom after the split. And in his sin wherewith he made Israel to sin, to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger with their vanities, their empty pursuits. Now the rest of the acts of Omri, which he did, and his might that he showed, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? So Omri slept with his fathers, and was buried in Samaria, and Ahab his son reigned in his stead. And in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab the son of Omri to reign over Israel, and Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. The reason that there is the overlap here, remember, Jehoshaphat is Asa's son. Okay? So that's the overlap here that you ultimately get to with Jehoshaphat showing affinity with Ahab. So verse 30. And Ahab the son of Omri, listen to this, did evil in the sight of the Lord above that all that were before him. I mean, it just gets, it's awful. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him, and reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. Wow! This has just got to be heartbreaking to God for his people to get this far away from him. Wow. Let's put a couple of things together before we get to our message tonight. Okay, it just really helps me to kind of fit the puzzle pieces together. So here we go. Solomon's reign ended in 931 BC. Okay? That's when the kingdom split and Rehoboam and Jeroboam became kings of the divided nation. Since that time, about 58 years have gone by between the split and when Jehoshaphat became king of Judah in 873 BC. Ahab would become the king of Israel a year later, after the short reign of his father Omri of about, or the short reigns of the northern kings there. And again, remember, Omri was one of the two captains who raided the capital, causing the king Zimri to burn his house down around it. The other captain, Tibni, was also king in that time span as well. Ultimately, Omri won over enough of the nation to overcome Tibni and become the king. About the most significant thing he did in relation to the northern kingdom was to get the capital established in Samaria. Up to this point, the kings had been living in that city called Tirzah, but now they finally had a firm established capital city, Samaria. This is where his son would take up residence and continue to sell the northern kingdom down the tubes. His actions are what make his association with Jehoshaphat very, very puzzling. So, let's see as these verses come to life in front of us, verses 29 and 30. First of all, the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab, the son of Omri, to reign over Israel. Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel and Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. Start filling out your sheet with things are getting worse and worse. Things are getting worse and worse. While Judah has had kings who followed in the footsteps of David, Asa, and Jehoshaphat, Israel just keeps drifting further and further away from God. There's a lesson to be learned here from the northern kingdom, that once we start compromise in our lives, we are just about capable of anything. True? The northern kingdom began with Jeroboam just saying, hey, we're not going to cross the border and go down and worship in Jerusalem anymore. Made 2 golden calves and set one up kind of down south and one up north, and said, these are your gods. We're going to worship them now. These are your 2 places of worship. And it all began to snowball from there. until the point where you get Omri doing worse than all that were before him. And now his son, Ahab, doing evil above all that were before him. I mean, is that not crazy? That it just keeps getting worse and worse. I suppose we should at least stop right here for a second and try to find an anecdote. You know? We should try to find some help. And when we go back and realize that Jeremiah 17:9 tells us the heart is desperately wicked, who can know it? That we realize that we are capable of anything. And unless we are completely given over to the Lord, you and I can do anything. Because that's in our heart. Or, how about this? It comes out of the heart because of what we put into our heart. The world's wicked, man. All kinds of wickedness all around. And so we need to always guard what's going into our lives. Because once that snowball begins to roll down the hill, things are just going to get worse and worse. You know as well as I do, you don't have to go very far in this world to find trouble. I mean, that's just the truth. And so we've got to be careful. And that's another reason why that we need to, okay, the antidote is to guard our hearts, but it's also to guard each other. You know, to watch out for each other. To be that kind of a brother or a sister that would go up to a brother or a sister and put an arm around a brother or a sister and say, hey, what's going on here? Shoot straight with me as I'm shooting straight with you. And another thing too, God may have allowed us to go through some things so that we are just the right brother or sister to go up to a brother or sister and say, hey, I've been there. And here's the answer. You know, I've told you before, I was probably just a few drinks away from being a full-blown alcoholic when I was 21 years old. And I got to be honest, the only way that I could give up the beer and the whiskey, that was the two things that I liked, was God. Is the only way. I mean, that's it. Because I found out the hard way that I couldn't do it on my own. But God helped me. And I'm not proud of that at all. And I don't believe that we go out into the world and do worldly things so we're building a testimony. That's just, I don't think we have any little ones. That's just stupid. But if we have been through some things, we have been delivered from some things, then we are that brother or sister that needs to help a brother or sister out. Right? So that can be another antidote. Guard the heart, but guard each other. Guard each other in this way. Otherwise, man, things are just going to get worse and worse. Verse 31. Pretty simple. If you get the WW thing we got going on, he took a wicked wife. Boy, did he ever. Isn't it funny how if parents find out that they're having a little girl, that one of the names that is not discussed between a husband and wife is Jezebel? I mean, really. I mean, for that matter, there's not many guys running around named Ahab. But for sure, you know, I'm just saying right now, if we had a couple get pregnant in our church and we're, going to have a little baby girl, and boy, do I ever love baby girl. I had two, so I mean, I just love the baby girls, and they're so cute and cuddly and all that kind of stuff. But if that mom and dad decided we're going to name that baby Jezebel, I'd have a little counseling session. Because look, there's something going on with that name. And I don't think you want to associate your, you don't really get a good nickname out of Jezebel. Right? It's just not going to be good at all. So, he took a wicked wife. Ahab, of course, took Jezebel to be his wife. She was the daughter, the Bible tells us, of Baal there in verse 31. It came to pass, as if it had been a light. There's a little sarcasm in the Bible from time to time. I mean, it's, the chronicle here is saying, as if it wasn't enough that he was already doing worse than his dad Omri, he goes off and marries the daughter of a high priest in the worship of Baal. Jezebel. Nuts. If it was a light thing, again, he marries Jezebel, the daughter of Baal of the Zidonians, went and served Baal and worshipped him. The name Baal means Baal is alive. Anybody familiar with the first part of 1 Samuel? I think the Lord's really kind of speaking to me. I've been praying this week and last week about where we're going to go from here in our Bible reading for the year. And we've been reading 1 John every day, and saw something new in 1 John today, man. It was just so great. I was so excited to write it down. But next week, we start a new month. June's here, and I was thinking we probably need to read 1 Samuel. There's just some great life lessons in 1 Samuel and some great individual verses and things like that, but there's a lot of story that goes on in 1 Samuel. In the early part of 1 Samuel, the Ark of the Covenant gets stolen by the Philistines. And the Philistines put the Ark of the Covenant in the same place as their God. And the next day, they go in to worship their God, and their God had fallen down before the Ark of the Covenant. It's a really, really cool story that reminds me that Baal is not God. Even though Baal means Baal is alive, they're serving a dead God. A useless God. It's a really sad situation. So Baal was the king of Phoenicia, a province that included Tyre and Sidon. Remember, Tyre and Sidon are right on the Mediterranean Sea, up in the very north part, before you begin to go around the corner to get into what's modern-day Turkey and where Paul went on his mission trips, basically. Tyre and Sidon were cities not very far from the home church of the Apostle Paul, Antioch. Okay, so that's where Tyre and Sidon is, and it was the region of Phoenicia at this time. And not only was he the king of Phoenicia, but he was also known as a priest to the false gods of Melkart and Astarte. I'm pretty sure I blew those two names of other gods, but that's as good as a West Texas kid could do. With this sort of influence, Jezebel then became the queen of Israel. Imagine this. Not only was Ahab not marrying a Jewess, but he had gone out into the heathen of heathens, basically, and taken a wife. So her impact was immediate on the whole nation. In fact, it was so legendary that Jesus speaks of the seduction of the church at Thyatira by saying that they were following after the deeds of Jezebel, all the way over in Revelation chapter 2. So her reputation of being so ungodly and so wicked is a biblical principle that continues on and on and on. When he does, of course, Jesus talking about her in Revelation 2, he refers to Jezebel as the false prophetess, or the queen of the false prophets. So Ahab did it. He really took a winner. He chose a good one, a wicked wife. Then what we see in the last couple of verses here, the end of verse 31, went served Baal, they worshipped him, and Ahab reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. So what we find here is she continued to lead the people toward woeful worship. Woeful worship. As Israel was already given to worshiping false gods, the ones that Jeroboam had already set up, it just got worse. You see, the Bible says that they built a temple in Samaria, and that Jezebel began to build groves. Groves, by the way, can be interpreted, the way I've always thought is kind of a shrubbery type deal, but actually groves in this instance it's wooden images. And I'm just making an illustration here, okay? I'm not making any kind of a connotation. But it reminded me of totem poles. Okay, if you've ever seen totem poles, we've seen the world's largest totem pole just north of where we used to live in Oklahoma. The thing is amazing. And things, but it's something like that. It's kind of a wooden image that you would set up. And you remember when Paul was in Athens, and they had set up all this whole line of gods. Remember? And the reason why is they didn't want to miss one. In fact, they didn't want to miss one so badly that they set up one more at the end, the unknown God. Right? And so this is just a grove of idols, of wooden images that Jezebel had set up. And then, of course, they appointed priests and false prophets too. I mean, it's just like anything anti-God. I don't know if you see this building up, but Samaria actually became the anti-Jerusalem. Okay, follow me for just a second. We're done. Omri is like King David, who went up and conquered Jerusalem. Remember? And again, Jerusalem's a city set on a hill. Guess what? Samaria will also set about 300 feet above the plain. And it was on top of a hill. Therefore, it was easily fortified, just as Jerusalem was, against its enemies. Omri and David conquered either city, Jerusalem, Samaria. Their sons were the ones that came in and built the temple. Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, and of course now Ahab is building this temple in Samaria. It's like Samaria becomes the anti-capital. Anything ungodly is going to roll through Samaria. Isn't that too big of a coincidence to be a coincidence? Could that parallel why that the devil is always just trying to mimic God? And even when the Antichrist is indwelled by the power of the devil 3.5 years into the Great Tribulation that lasts 7 years. Remember, he's going to come out speaking blasphemies. And the blasphemies that he would speak would go something like, he's going to tell the world that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And no man comes to his Father except through him. You see, that's the way Satan works. He just tries to mimic God. It's just another example of it. You've got the anti-Jerusalem being built up in Samaria. Is that not an interesting thought? And they've appointed priests, and they're doing everything just like what's going on down south in Jerusalem, where the real temple of God is. And they are worshiping Jehovah God under their godly king, Jehoshaphat. Again, maybe Jehoshaphat saw all this and thought, man, something's got to be done. Maybe he thought he could influence Ahab toward the one true God. However, as we will learn, his association with Ahab gets interesting. And so in the weeks to come, we're going to see how this all plays out. Let's pray. Father, we love you. Thank you so much for your word. Pray that you would have spoken to us in a great way tonight through it. That we will take what we've talked about tonight seriously, take it to heart, and learn and apply it to our lives.